Good day, and welcome for joining us at our Healthy Minds speaker series. It's great to have you join us today. We're going to take the same format as we have in past weeks, but with a different topic. And I trust it'll be an engaging time. So as a reminder, our structure that we've taken each week is we have a guest speaker who speaks for about 15 minutes, and then we spend the last half of our time interacting through Q&A. So again, if you have a question, there's an icon in the top corner of the screen, a stick figure with their hand. You can just click on that and ask the questions. Who we have with today is we have Dr. Bill Howitt, who's been with us for each of these sessions. Good to see you again, Dr. Howitt.
Nice to be here.
And we also have Dr. Craig Sawchuk, and I'll introduce him in a moment, but welcome, Dr. Sawchuk.
Great.
Yeah. So what we're going to be doing, our past sessions, we've spent time looking at many different topics. So we started the series in terms of looking at what it's like to be in isolation, something very relevant for what's been going on. We've had a few weeks talking about anxiety and how to handle that. And last week we had a special opportunity to talk about anxiety kind of from the angle of a frontline worker and some of the tools that would be helpful for people and the stresses that they encounter there. What we have coming up now is that in the future, we're going to be doing some sessions on some different topics that we think will be relevant. Next week, we're going to do a session on parenting during COVID. I imagine a lot of you are saying, oh, I wish you had opened with that, because but you might have a lot of ideas now in terms of kind of lessons learned. And so we're going to do something on that topic next week. And then we have a future session also on mindfulness. Mindfulness has come up kind of as a recurring theme through the discussions that we've had. And so what we're going to be doing is having an expert come in and talk about that. I'm extremely pleased, though, with the topic that we have today. And today we're going to be hearing from Dr. Sawchuk around sleep and tips to improve sleep. And I'm sure a lot of you, either through your own experience or for what you've read, you've heard a lot of stories how COVID, one of the impacts has been is that people find that their sleep patterns have been interrupted and maybe not of the same quality that they're used to. And we're going to get some tips today in terms of how you actually can approach that and see improvement. So with that, I'd like to officially welcome you, Dr. Sawchuk. Thank you for joining us. And you have a bit of a Canadian connection. So even though you're at the Mayo Clinic, it's great that you're a part and joining us here at Maple Leaf Foods.
Great. Well, definitely thank you so much for having me, guys. And yeah, I'm Canadian from Vancouver, British Columbia. So a big shout out to any of the Vancouverites that are out there as well, too. But yeah, just love the opportunity to be able to speak to my own kind. And I know we've got some folks down in the US that work for Maple Leaf as well, too. But thank you again so much for having me. And even though I'm, ordinarily this tie as part of the rotation, made sure I wore the Maple Leaf tie today. So I always kind of look for every opportunity I can share Canadian culture with my American colleagues down here. But again, a great opportunity to be able to chat with you guys. And I think Maple Leaf is doing just a great job, as we're seeing a lot of industries really paying attention to health of our employees, health of our colleagues that we're looking at, and starting to wash away some of that division that we typically look at physical health and mental health, and rather just looking at them in terms of health together. So this opportunity in this series, the You Are Not Alone series that Maple Leaf is putting on, I think is a great example of population-based health, where folks can start to get some tips and some ideas to try to help their coping during this quite admittedly difficult time right now. So hopefully I can add to that and start to talk about some different ideas to help with our sleep. So can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so yeah, you bring in a psychologist and you get the sarcastic question. So how are you sleeping these days? I work in primary care, and two of the most common symptoms really that we see are in primary care are pain and sleep. So actually, over the course of our lifetime, running through some periods of time, when our sleep is not all that restorative, we run into insomnia. That's actually not uncommon for us at any point in time. So whenever we think of getting more to that point of clinical insomnia, we're thinking, usually about for at least 3 months of a stretch, about 3 days, 3 nights out of a given week, starting to have non-restorative sleep, and that can come in a variety of different flavors. Sometimes we think of just difficulties falling asleep, or that fragmented sleep during the night where you're kind of up and down throughout the night, or that early awakening. Those types of disturbances can be common, and in fact, people can have a combination of all three of those things. The really, really good thing, however, is that these sleep disturbances, insomnia, are very correctable. I mean, there are some skills that we're going to be reviewing in just a little bit, and these are great evidence-based skills that we've known for a couple of decades that are extremely helpful, extremely durable, can reverse a number of the problems that go along with non-restorative sleep, and they work substantially better than medications. So we'll come back and we'll talk about some of those skills in particular, but we also look at what we're all going through right now with COVID-19 is it's also magnifying some typical risk factors that we see with sleep disruptions. We think of stress being a very common one, and geez, again, you don't need a psychologist to point out to you that we've got a ton of different types of stressors going on. We're all facing a number of uncertainties right now, whether it be job stability, financial, stability, also different demands that many of us are starting to wear different hats, and this idea of being able to work from home maybe doesn't sound quite as glamorous or as efficient as we'd like to think, especially for people that have kids at home and they're trying to manage both helping their kids stay on track with schooling, and while at the same time trying to do their work. So those demands have really picked up, and we've also seen that change and that impact on our typical social and biorhythms. You got to think of the therapeutic value of normalcy, what a normal day is like for us. So we get up at a regular time, we shower, get dressed, we commute into work, and we see our colleagues there, and there's that banter along the way. The environment changes a lot. It's really good stimulation for our brain. But with a lot of the social distancing that's been going on and trying to rework things in a different way and working from home, a lot of that novelty is getting narrowed right down, so there maybe isn't a lot of diversity going on. And then also, depending upon the nature of our work and what we're called to do, we may be doing a lot of working off hours now, and our biorhythms are getting thrown off. So the times we'd ordinarily sleep, we're starting to stretch that out and going to sleep at different times, likewise waking up at slightly different times. And what typically goes along with this are that habit changes start to come into play. So it's not uncommon that people are cranking up on their caffeine use, and I love, Tim Hortons. Some people are drinking, maybe a little bit more when they're tired. It's the body's natural inclination to rest and sleep. Sometimes napping is just simply something to do. It gives them, it's like a behavior, kind of fills the time a little bit. But while all those things kind of make sense, they start to throw off these rhythms. And that's why when we actually look at how do we behaviorally manage sleep, that's what we're actually looking for, is how do these sleep problems get maintained over time. So if we can go to the next slide. This is just one way of looking at how we approach sleep problems. So there can be a combination of risk factors, and some of us out there actually have some pre-existing health issues, for example, like sleep apnea, that may be at play, and say they're using a CPAP, or as we talked about earlier on, stress, environmental changes can lead to some of these risk factors. But once sleep disruption starts to happen, and it consistently happens over time, we start to experience daily problems. It's harder to focus. We're being less efficient with things around the home, with at work. We may start to feel a little bit more irritable and things like that. And it's common that in turn we do a lot of compensatory behaviors, some of those things that we just mentioned. If I'm struggling with turning my brain off at night, maybe I'm drinking a little bit more, or I'm not as efficient during the day, so I'm staying up at night, cranking coffee. Or if I can't sleep, I'm getting up and I'm watching TV at night, or maybe throwing in a load of laundry, or trying to pound out some emails or some work. So those compensatory behaviors actually make sense in the moment because we're just trying to survive or make up for some inefficiencies during the day. But what it does is it creates that cycle of sleep disruption. And as you can see with this, it creates almost like a vicious cycle between it aggravates the problem itself of the sleep disruption, which compounds daily problems, and we engage in those compensatory behaviors. So it's kind of one of those things that we look at, these compensatory behaviors, they totally make sense. They really do. They totally make sense. But in the end, they're kind of screwing us over. But the good thing is that those things can actually be corrected. These are modifiable things. These are actually things within our control. So let's kind of jump in and talk about what evidence-based behavioral therapy for insomnia actually looks like. So if you can go to the next slide, this is just a quick visual of a staircase type of analogy. And notice that there's 2 smaller steps and then 2 bigger steps. So stimulus control, which is a super clunky behavioral term, it really has to do reassociating the bed and the nighttime with sleep. And that's really the key thing that we're going to be focusing in on in just a moment. And sleep restriction is also another very significant and important behavioral sleep strategy that can really help with insomnia. The 2 smaller steps, self-monitoring, sleep hygiene, worry management, relaxation, all those things can be helpful as well. All of us have heard tons about sleep hygiene. The problem is with true clinical insomnia, you can do everything sleep hygiene religiously and still be struggling. So that's why stimulus control, sleep restriction are really your 2 big heavy hitters here. And this is what's great about the series that Maple Leaf is putting on for you. You're getting some practical tips with worry management, so people that are having that busy brain going on at night, some great tips to be able to help with that. Mindfulness, relaxation skills can be helpful. But I really want to focus in on stimulus control because that is a very practical, easy to do kind of thing that really gets us a lot of mileage in terms of improving our overall quality of sleep, which in turn just helps our functioning. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So really the idea here with some practical tips is first off, just getting your biorhythm into a rhythm. We're human, we're kind of getting thrown off, with our sleep schedules and our work schedules and everything. So getting our sleep into a basic rhythm is really key. So try to think about it this way, is that machines in general run better when they're on a rhythm. So our bodies are just the same. So ideally, try to get into that rhythm with your sleep where you're going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time. We actually know from research that actually maintaining the same wake-up routine is actually more predictive of restorative sleep than going to bed at the same time. But doing your best to kind of maintain both of them. The bigger the sleep disruption that you have going on right now, the more consistent you want with that rhythm. So it doesn't matter if it's a weekend or a holiday or a vacation time, maintain that same rhythm the longer that you can, or the longest that you can. That helps to get our body into that motion. The idea of stimulus control is reassociating the bed and the nighttime with sleep. Really think about this behaviorally. Sometimes what inadvertently happens when we're working from home, our bedroom can become Grand Central Station. Maybe we've got our office in there. Maybe we're pounding out some emails while we're laying in bed or just trying to watch TV. We want to get all that out of there and just really try to associate that bed and that nighttime with sleep. So trying to minimize any kind of excess or unnecessary daytime activities in your bedroom. Try to move your office space as best as you can out of that bedroom entirely, so it's just associated with sleep. About 30 to 60 minutes before your targeted bedtime, so like let's just say your targeted bedtime is like 10 o'clock, maybe around 9:30, that's where you want to do this wind down routine or a washout routine. Try to think about it like how we, for caregivers and parents, how you've actually like trained your kids to sleep. I mean, that's such a survival skill when they're little, but really pay attention to the brain learning that happens, is that at a certain time during the night, the lights get low, we start to use that quiet voice, we maybe give them a bath, they get changed into comfy clothes, they brush their teeth, we get them into bed, lights out, and repeat. Nighttime always comes, and repeat and repeat. And think about the brain learning. The brain starts to learn, hey, these are signposts that sleep is coming when the lights go down, when the bath gets drawn, when I get changed. And actually, we're like kids too. So if we can develop that same kind of routine where we're dramatically reducing, if not eliminating, any excess stimulation. So this means for all your Maple Leaf emails and work-related responsibilities, at least 30 to 60 minutes before your targeted bedtime, don't get on that kind of stuff. Then go to bed at your targeted bedtime, and if you fall asleep right away, that's great. But if you ever find during your sleep window, and let's say your sleep window is between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., anytime between that sleep window, if you're finding that you're laying awake in bed for longer than an estimated 15 to 20 minutes, you got to get out of bed. You got to go into a different room. And going into a place somewhere like a living room or a family room in a sitting up position, and that's important too, be in a sitting up position and do boring things. Boring things could be listening to me talking to you right now, if you haven't tuned out already. But things like relaxation, listening to relaxing music. So don't do thrash metal; that wouldn't be good for you. But do boring things. Don't give your brain stimulation. And try to think about it: is this activity going to settle my brain down, or is it going to wake up? And we do boring things until we start to feel sleepy, not tired. And what we mean by sleepy is your body's going to give you two signs that you're ready for bed and ready for sleep again. One is just the head nod, so your head is just kind of dropping off. And again, some of you listening to me chat maybe are already experiencing that. Or sometimes just your eyes get pretty heavy as you're fighting to keep them open. That's a great sign that your body is ready to try to go back to bed and to try to sleep. And keep that cycle going and keep repeating that over the rest of the night. So you may be up and down a few times. So if you got a bed partner, you may need to let them know about that, but keep that going over time. And that helps to retrain the brain to associate the bed and the nighttime with sleep. Again, it's totally understandable that sometimes when our sleep gets fragmented is we get up at 2:37 in the morning and we know it's a write-off that, well, I'm not going to fall back asleep again, so I may as well be productive. So sometimes we jump on the computer, sometimes we'll take care of maybe some laundry or some dishes or other things like that too. Don't do that stuff. It's tempting, and I totally get it, but don't do it, because those things are completely associated with normal wakeful activity. So it kind of confuses the brain more and also gives us light stimulation, which we're trying to dramatically reduce during those nighttime hours. So try to keep it in that low, boring gear until you get sleepy and not tired, and keep repeating that over the course of a given week, and maybe stretching it out even longer until that sleep pattern gets in there. Again, always remember that nighttime always comes. There's always an opportunity to work on this, and the brain and body will pick up on this. So if you can go to the next slide, I just want to highlight a few really great resources that are out there. Again, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is an evidence-based intervention. And there's a great resource right here with mysleepwell.ca for any of our colleagues in Dalhousie. Dalhousie University pulled this together. Great website, free resources, helps to walk through talking about stimulus controls we just talked about, but some of the other behavioral sleep strategies that are great. Down here in the US, the Veterans Administration's system has come up with this great app. Our phones follow us wherever we go, just don't use them in bed during your sleep window. But they have the CBTI Coach, great free app that walks us through some basic education about the nature of sleep and some behavioral skills that can be helpful. And then finally, it's just a smattering of some self-help, traditional self-help resources. These are great. Try to think about it like same wine, different bottles. The principles listed in these ones are all consistent with the evidence-based literature on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's just a matter of pricing, whichever one's the cheapest, and then also sometimes just how it's written may kind of hit you the right way. So those are just three, and there's like dozens, honestly, of really good behavioral self-help resources. But this is a really good slide. This will kind of reinforce some of those principles, and I think will give some people some additional tips that they could work on that can maybe help further target the nature of their sleep disruption. So if we go to the next slide, I think that'll be it, and we'll be happy, Dr. Howard and I will be happy to field any questions, and remember, any hard statistical questions will go to Dr. Howitt.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sawchuk. This is awesome. The interest here is really considerable, so we have a lot of questions. One thing I'll say too, folks, because I know there's some content here, we will send out the content afterwards. So, you'll have this, you don't have to take pictures of your screen. We'll send it to you. One of the first questions, though, is about sleep hygiene. And the person says, we all know what it, or heard, we know what it is, but it's actually a new term. So can you describe, what sleep hygiene actually is?
Right.
Good sleep
Yeah.
looks.
Yeah, it's just doing all of those like basic kind of like building block types of things. So we think of the sleep environment, cool, dark, and quiet. We're animals. Our brains are actually naturally hardwired to go into that low gear mode and release certain hormones when it starts to get dark, and likewise, like the tide, it recedes when it starts to get light exposure. So that's why the cool, dark, quiet, trying to minimize any excess stimulation. The brain is always awake to a certain extent, so trying to reduce some of that stimulation. And sometimes, even as an intervention that we have people do is take a roll of electrician's tape and any of those like little tiny LED lights that may be in your room, plug it on there. Another thing that we recommend from a sleep hygiene perspective is turn your clock. If you got a digital clock, turn it the other way. It's amazing how good we are at math in the middle of the night, where we're just automatically calculating how much time we have left. So those are some like really, really basic, good building block things to have in place that creates like a good sleep environment. And then there's other things, like trying to limit or eliminate any caffeine use 3 hours or by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's a variety of different things that are in there. But again, some people can be doing those things religiously and doing them really well and still struggling with sleep problems.
Yeah, all I would add to it is think of it also as a pre-bed routine as well. The things that you're going to do with consistency before. So stopping your stimuli before, like, for example, as Craig suggested, having a structured routine, watching how much blue light you have. In other words, having a computer screen, 60 minutes before bed may not be optimal. How you do your wind down is very much like, so it's almost like I try to get people to think about as having a structured process. So some people will start their bedtime routine. If they go to bed at 10, they might want to start at 8:30, getting themselves ready, having a bath, getting themselves comfortable, starting to think about it, maybe do some reading. It's a process, and everything else that Craig talked about is having that strategy as well as once you get into the room. That's important. And then also the strategy how not to fight with your bed. That's one thing I talk about. There's no sense in fighting with your bed. So I really think of everyone that has a problem. Moby Dick's a great book to get on the side. Have it in another room, and the struggle with Moby Dick. You will go to sleep pretty quick.
Yeah. And fighting with your bed just looks ridiculous. You're just pounding the mattress, it's not good.
There's a couple questions here that kind of have a theme around anxiety. I'm going to cover two of them and then like to hear from you. They're quite related. The first one, not sure if this is insomnia or not. I can fall asleep easily. My issue is during the work week, I cannot stay asleep. Similarly, another person says I fall asleep easily, but then in 3 or 4 hours, I wake up anxious with a racing mind.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how these people can approach that?
Yeah, and this is.
You go.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. Totally. This is a part of the sleep disruption. This could be so frustrating, as well too. It's not like we're not working hard enough, physically and especially mentally, right now. So we are fried by the time that we're going to bed, and it just doesn't seem fair, that we fall asleep pretty easily, but then seemingly maybe at a reliable time during the night, we just kind of come to, and then sometimes it's the coming to. And we're just awake. We're not necessarily worrying or feeling anxious, but then sometimes that is the case. So we kind of wake up and our mind already hits the ground running. Either way, both things can be managed. So again, because nighttime always comes, sometimes the brain and the body gets into that habit by 2:37 in the morning. It just starts to wake up again. So that's where all those stimulus control things that we talked about an estimated 15 to 20 minutes, get into another room, do boring things until you get sleepy, then go back to bed. For the anxiety thing, that's something where sometimes we have to do like a little bit more of some add-on strategies and work in dealing with that busy brain, like what's the content of that busy brain. So sometimes it really depends on the individual. Sometimes we can do some strategies where we can help people retrain the brain of when to do their thinking. So remember, we talked about 30 to 60 minutes before bedtime, get into that wind down routine. We can imagine the 30 to 60 minutes before the wind down routine, we could do like a brain download, get some of that material that's going on that they're worrying about down, on paper, then put it aside, then wake up the next morning within the first hour, wake up, review that material. Maybe there's some take-homes that come with that. But there are also some really good strategies that are really targeted at directly challenging these worries, gaining flexibility in our thinking. Some great evidence-based strategies that are out there that require sometimes a little bit of a step-up related care. There's some great apps, or sometimes meeting with a provider can be helpful in terms of working on those skills to gain flexibility in our thinking. The trick is that we don't want to be processing that stuff or even working on our worry management skills during the middle of the night, because what does that do? That wakes up the brain. That's a daytime type of activity. It requires some heavy lifting sometimes to go over our worries. So sometimes we need a little bit of help during the normal wakeful hours to help quell our mind at night. So Dr. Howitt, what else?
Yeah, it's interesting when I'm listening to you. Lots of folks probably don't know what's the whole default mode network of how our brain's wandering 46.9% of the time, constantly trying to problem solve. So I love what you said, Craig, is that I try to get patients to make sure if they're having a worrisome mind is empty the cup before they go to bed. So everything I want to remember that I'm going to problem solve tomorrow, I'm going to write down in my journal, say, these are what I'm going to deal with tomorrow. So I can start to train my brain that I'm not going to forget it. See, what people, because if we try to keep it all in our head, our brain's trying to solve it, worried that we're going to forget it. But if you train your brain and say, hey, dude, I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to write it all down. It'll be there in the morning. And then your brain can actually, then to your point, you get that whole parasympathetic nervous system going. That's when your endocrine system, that's where all the healing happens. That's why sleep is so important to us.
Yeah.
So guys, we're getting a lot of questions, and I want to change subjects a bit. There's ones here related to white noise. There's a question about, does white noise work? Somebody asked specifically saying that they've successfully slept with the TV on for years. And it seems to work for them. But I think the question here is this a dangerous behavior, or, what are your thoughts on white noise?
Yeah, so definitely white noise for certain individuals can be helpful. And what happens, what's white noise? It is boring. It is redundant. It's the same sound over and over and over again. So if you kind of think of how does the brain process that, there's not a lot of variability with that. So white noise for certain types of individuals can be helpful, especially for people that tend to be light sleepers, or you got teenage children that like to explore during the night. Sometimes that can be helpful. And there's plenty of, again, good apps that are out there. You can get white noise stuff for free these days. Now the TV is always like an interesting thing, because for many people it's like, oh, I've been doing it for years, and totally understand that it becomes part of our sleep environment. But again, pay attention to a couple of things. The TV is actually normally associated with wakeful activities, number one. Secondly, there's a lot of variability in the types of stimulation that actually goes on with the TV show and transitioning to commercials and other things like that too. So pay attention to actually what happens to the brain in terms of bouncing up and down. Now, again, it's become very conditioned, to their sleep. They may not necessarily be the most restorative sleep, but if you're starting to find there's a lot more daytime fatigue, a lot more fragmentation in sleep, then yeah, you got to cut out the TV. It's a hard one because it's part of our culture, to have that around us. But it's actually, unfortunately, one of those behaviors that makes sense in one level, but can actually be contributing to your problems at another.
Yeah, I agree.
So folks, we have a number of questions here, and a lot of them they're great questions and very specific. I think what we're going to do is find a way to take these questions that you have and see if we can kind of communicate back to them, recognizing that we're not going to be able to get to all of them today. I'm wondering, between the two of you, we have 30 seconds left. There's a question here that I think is around people who work off shifts. And it says they're on a 24/7 type of job where and a phone call or a message can pop up and they need to respond. We have 30 seconds left. Can you guys just do any advice?
I'm sure Craig can give them a pineal gland master class quickly.
I'll jump to it really fast. Honestly, our bodies are not built for shift work or 24/7 work. We think of the limbic system, which is our threat detection system, as part of what keeps us on. So I know that there are some jobs that are out there, and some with your company, where we are on the hook 24/7. And while it makes sense that we got to do that work sometimes, it's actually not sustainable over the longer term. So that's why anybody who's doing shift work where they're flopping back and forth or that they're on call, it's typically not going to be healthy sleep for them.
Yeah, I was just going to say the big one I've learned with shift work is light management. It's just using because it's amazing because you're trying to go to bed, but there's a party once you have different chemicals released, it actually works against us. So by leaving your shift with glasses and managing light management, dark during the day, just trying to keep those basic elements as much as you can.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure you have a shift work. I think I have a shift work guide somewhere too. I'm sure Craig has something we could probably share.
Yeah.
So we're out of time today. Dr. Sawchuk, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome.
Dr. Howitt, thank you again. Always a pleasure. And for all of you, thank you for being a part of our session today. As I said, we're going to look at your questions and find a way to answer them, be it in a future session or through an email. So stay tuned, and you can leave our minds to figure that one out. And I wish you all a good sleep tonight. So thank you very much. Bye.
Yeah, take care, guys.
Thank you.